What's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. Today is August 8th, 2025, about 9:30 p.m. where I'm at right now. And we are continuing our 13th book in our Book to React series. This is episode 15 of Black Bolshevik, Autobiography of an Afro-American Communist, written by Harry Haywood Hall. Now, this is a very long book that we've been trying to digest over the summer. It's over 700 pages, and I've been enjoying this read so much because this man reminds me of my own life. He gives me insight of so much into what happened in the 20th century with leftist movements and also being a black internationalist. Harry Haywood's extensive travels throughout the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, as well as his time coming up as a young black man at the turn of the 20th century when so much was changing for our people. I find this book endlessly fascinating. I haven't been going live or posting a lot this past week because I've been extremely busy with work. I also haven't been feeling well during certain days after coming home from work, so it's been extremely hard for me to find the energy to come on live. But I'm finding some time in between classes right now, in between work, to come on live today to have this episode. And I want to give a shout out to everybody who's been supporting this content. I've been checking the comments and seeing all the love. Also seeing all the hate as well from the white supremacists that continue to leave negative comments on this channel, and also black reactionaries as well. But nevertheless, the struggle continues, the war continues, and we're going to continue knocking down the chapters in this book. We're going to be reading chapter 12 today, Return Home, White Chauvinism Under Fire. The previous video had a mistake in its title. I thought the chapter before was titled that, chapter 11, but the chapter that we read last time was actually my last year in the Soviet Union, and that's where he was talking about, everything that was happening in the party, the fight between the Lovestone group, which was a reactionary force, revisionist force, and him fighting back against revisionism, and also him reconnecting with his wife Ina, and several other things as well. And once again, this is a very rare book to find in print, which is why we're reading this on live stream partially, and also this is a book that you can get for free online at libcom.org. Just scroll down and click the PDF. You can also go to marxist.org to get the book as well. And this is where we had to piece together the last few pages. If you've been following this journey, we had to piece together some pages because the PDF I'm reading from had some out of whack, and we had to put them together. And if you want to get a copy of this book, it's getting extremely hard to find. I'm pleasantly surprised to see that somebody bought the paperback version. I'm not going to take credit for that. I'm not going to take credit for giving money to Amazon, which is where you can find this book. Paperback used to be for about $50, but now that's gone. That's sold out. Somebody obviously picked it up. But the hardcover is still out there, and that might be your rent or half of your rent. As you can see, it's about $700 or so. And giving a shout out to my guy Kamal up in the live stream. He says, I thought you were MIA. Glad you're well. Shout out to Kamal, always showing support. And without further ado, we're going to be jumping into chapter 12, Return Home, White Chauvinism Under Fire. Remember, in the Communist Party, there was a strong tendency for some white members of the party to have a paternalistic attitude towards black Americans. They thought, black people weren't able to grasp Marxist theory. They thought that the revolution should be led by white intellectuals, and Harry Haywood and other communists were trying to fight back against this tendency of white supremacy, or as he called it, white chauvinism within the party. And also, during the previous chapter, he continues to advocate for the idea of black nationalism in its truest sense, meaning that black people in America have the right to self-determination, meaning that they are a nation within a nation who should have some autonomy over their region. And this is an idea that I'm still not convinced of. I've been mulling over it ever since I started reading this book, and it just comes down to personal preference for me. I understand the political argument for it. I just don't feel nationalism towards any country or any sort of liberation movement concerning black people. But that's just my opinion on that. But I'm going to continue reading, and we're going to continue challenging ourselves and challenging the ideas in the book, and also learning and growing together. So giving a shout out once again. Sorry for the long introduction. It's been a long time coming, but now we're back. So let's jump in. Chapter 12, Return Home, White Chauvinism Under Fire. Put one more S in the USA to make it Soviets. Put one more S in the USA. Oh, we'll live to see it yet. When the land belongs to the farmers and the factories to the working men. The USA, when we get control, will be the USSA then. Langston Hughes. Bars from Langston Hughes. I think something that we forget about a lot of our black intellectuals and revolutionaries of the 20th century is that they were explicitly Marxist. I don't think when people think of Langston Hughes or W.B. Du Bois or Paul Robeson that they think about them as actually Marxist revolutionaries, actual communists. Let's continue here. I arrived in New York in early November 1930. After 4.5 years in the Soviet Union, everything seemed quite strange. It was only 4.5 years. It felt like a decade. It felt like he was there for a good 10 years, but I was wrong. While passing through customs, I lit up a cigarette. Those were the good old days where you could just smoke a Joe up in the airport. A cop snarled at me out of the corner of his mouth. No smoking here, fella. Okay, maybe I was wrong. You couldn't smoke in the airport. I was so startled by his rude tone that the cigarette dropped from my lips. Out in the street, I caught a taxi to the national office of the party, which was then located on East 125th Street in Harlem. I looked at the people along the way. Despair seemed written on their faces. I don't believe I saw a smile all the way uptown. What a contrast to the gay and laughing crowds in Moscow and Leningrad. Look at that. People more happy in the Soviet Union than in the USA. I was about to say USSA. That has a ring to it. What a contrast to the gay and laughing crowds in Moscow and Leningrad. I had arrived in the first year of the Great Depression. My own depression deepened as we drove through Harlem. That reverse culture shock of when you're a black man abroad and then you return to America and you say, ugh, brother, ugh. Woo. I was overwhelmed by Harlem's shabbiness and the expression of hopelessness on the faces of the people. Arriving at the office, I was greeted by Earl Browder and my old friend Bob Miner. They introduced me to Jack Stachel, a party leader and national organizer for the TUUL, and Ben Amos, a black comrade who was then in charge of Afro-American work. All four men were discussing last-minute plans for the anti-lynching conference called by the American Negro Labor Congress. It was to be held in St. Louis on November 15th, a couple days later. The party's plan, as I gathered, was to use this occasion to launch a new organization, the League of Struggle for Negro Rights. This new organization was to replace the now practically defunct ANLC, which had proved inadequate and sectarian. The ANLC had been the subject of sharp criticism as early as the Sixth World Congress in 1928. The idea of the new organization had been discussed at the party's convention in July. There had also been discussion at the Negro Commission in the Comintern. The LSNR was conceived as the nucleus of a united front movement around the party's program for black liberation. The Liberator was to be carried over from the ANLC as the official publication of the new organization. After greeting me, the comrades continued the discussion. I was just in time to participate in the conference and was given the task of writing a draft manifesto and program for the LSNR. I was asked if I had anything to say. I expressed happiness at being back home after such a long absence and said that I would do my best to carry out the new responsibility. I was also happy to hear about the expected Southern delegation to the conference, which reflected party work in the South and made some remarks about the need for an agrarian program for the blacks in the South. I noticed that as I spoke, some of the comrades were looking at me curiously, as if puzzled or amused. I wondered about it at the time, but I was to find out why only after the meeting. The YSCI representative, a young Russian who was sitting on the meeting, said, "Harry, you've got a strong Russian accent in your English." That's crazy. He was speaking so much Russian. He came back with a Russian accent. That's crazy. If I had not been looking at you directly, I would have sworn some Russian immigrant was speaking. Of course, I reflected. I had been unconsciously rolling my R's, a habit that was to stick with me for so many years. I traveled to St. Louis via Detroit and Chicago in order to see my family, my three aunts of whom I was very fond, my sister Eppa and nephew David. I chose to travel by bus in order to get a close-up look at the country and the people. The blight of unemployment and hunger was evident everywhere. It gave the lie to Hoover's slogan of prosperity is right around the corner. People on the bus were friendly and relating their experiences. They seemed hopeless and confused, regarding the Depression as some sort of natural disaster. They complained about inadequate relief and evictions. From the bus windows, I could see Hoovervilles on the outskirts of many towns, vacant lot communities of shacks made from discarded boards and boxes and inhabited by homeless families. I stopped over in Detroit to see Clarence Hathaway, my old Lenin School friend, who was then district organizer. We went into a restaurant downtown on Woodward, a couple of blocks from the party office. We both ordered ham and eggs, and after waiting for what seemed an interminable period, our orders were finally brought to the table. I started to eat, but gagged and spit out the first mouthful on my plate. "What's the matter?" Clarence asked. "This stuff is as salty as brine," I said in amazement. "Yeah," he said incredulously, "mine seems to be all right." He tasted some of mine and immediately spat it out, then called the waiter indignantly. "What's the matter?" the waiter asked. "My friend's food is so salty it's inedible. Inedible." The waiter, with an evil leer, said, "Well, that's the best we can do," and walked away. It was only then that it struck me that this was their way of discouraging black patronage. I'd been out of the country so long that I'd forgotten a lot of these things. Okay, I didn't know it was going to go that direction. This is his first week or so back in the U.S., and he's having that reverse culture shock when you return and you realize America's a third world country. Like, he's just going through the countryside and seeing, like, shanty towns. He's driving through Harlem and seeing all the depressed black folk under the boots of white supremacy and capitalism. Like, it's just sad. And I thought he was gonna go and say, yeah, American food sucks after coming back. There's the little parts in this book that I relate to so much, where where you've been traveling abroad and then you come back and realize so many things about your country that are just messed up. But very interesting. I didn't know it was like that back in the day. That, restaurants would try to discourage black people from eating there by making their food nasty, which goes to show, this breaks down a lot of things right here, that within capitalism, just the idea of making profits and making money isn't enough to discourage some people from having white supremacist or anti-black thoughts. How does that help your business by making bad food for customers who are willing to pay? I think, once again, we have to realize, and as intersectional Marxists here, and for people that are curious about Marxism and don't understand it, and maybe end up learning about it and end up being class reductionists, that it's not just all about the capitalists have money and the means of production, and all they want to do is just make more money by any means. There's also an external force, an external idea, which is white supremacy and anti-blackness, which I believe is at the root of capitalism. Right? And so just think about that. That's a very deep paragraph right there. This business got a customer and decided to not treat this customer well simply because he was black, going against everything that would logically come from Marxism, where we say capitalists want to make profits by any means necessary. But continuing here. Clarence and I stalked out the restaurant, and there was a silence between us. He said, "Let's go to another restaurant in the black neighborhood." "I'm not hungry now. I've lost my appetite," I replied. "Clarence, this is your district, You've sure got a lot of work to do." I got the bus to Chicago. Still angry and in this mood, wrote the first draft of the manifesto and program of the conference. I poured all my anger into the resolution, and the whole thing came together very quickly. I arrived in Chicago. This great industrial center was hard hit by the crisis, with plants and mills partially closed. There was, as yet, no public welfare, only soup lines and private relief. Blacks were hardest hit of all. My elderly aunts, respectable, law-abiding people, and deeply religious, were forced to sell moonshine whiskey in order to make ends meet. They told me this is an apologetic, shame-faced way. Everybody's got to do something to get by. This really got to me. How many people are doing jobs that they hate simply because It's all about the money, simply because they have no other choice. They have to find a way to put food in their mouths. I called on old friends, and they all wanted to know about my experiences in the Soviet Union. I was interviewed by Lucius Harper of the Chicago Defender, who is an old friend of the family. I don't remember if the interview was ever published because I left right afterwards for St. Louis. I arrived in St. Louis on November 15th, the opening day of the conference, and met up with Otto, who was a delegate to the meeting. Let's remember Otto is his older brother, who also went to the Soviet Union, and who I believe is not a black nationalist like Harry is. He had been working in the South, probably Atlanta, and he told me of his experience there about his near lynching in Gastonia. I was happy to see so many of my old comrades like Richard B. Moore and Otto Huswood. Then there was Cyril Briggs. I was anxious to make his acquaintance as I had been in the Chicago Post of his African Blood Brotherhood and was a reader of the Crusader magazine and his numerous articles in the Daily Worker. There was also Herbert Newton, who had been a student at the Kutva and was now back in the thick of the struggle. He was the only black member of the Atlanta Six, a group of communist organizers charged under Georgia's Insurrection Act and facing possible electrocution. Damn. I didn't know you could be out on bail facing a death penalty. In America, of course. In America. A country that, still has the death penalty, like Saudi Arabia. Anyway, they had been arrested in an anti-lynching and unemployment demonstration in Atlanta. Yeah, that sounds very insurrection-y. We were out here trying to protest unemployment and stop lynching. You're trying to overthrow the Georgian government. The other 5 defendants were Henry Story, Ann Burlack, Mary Dalton, M.H. Powers, and Joe Carr. Newton and his co-defendants were released on bail as a result of protests all over the country and were now part of the Southern delegation to the conference. Ben Carruthers of Pittsburgh, Hathaway, Browder, and Baker were some of the party leaders present among the delegates. But there were many new faces at the conference, comrades with whom I was to work in coming years. The convention was called by the ANLC as a National Conference Against Lynching. In 1930 alone, there were 38 lynchings, 36 blacks and 2 whites. Wow. The conference was to be transformed into the founding convention of the League of Struggle for Negro Rights. The gatherings opened with a small but enthusiastic mass meeting. Its declared purpose, as stated in the Daily Worker, November 4th, 1930, was to build a powerful fighting mass movement and a militant newspaper to lead the Negro masses in struggle against oppression and for their demands for full political and social equality and the right of self-determination for Negro majorities in the South. In the spirit of working-class solidarity, which characterized the entire conference, a presidium of black and Southern white workers was elected at this session. The first business session opened on November 15th with 44 black and 34 white delegates in attendance. A rousing welcome was given the 16-member Southern delegation, which was led by Mary Dalton, a young white comrade, a National Textile Workers Union organizer, and one of the Atlanta Six. Otto Huswood made the report on the economic and political situation, and Herbert Newton reported on organization. The delegates continued to arrive, and by November 17th, they numbered 120, 73 blacks and 47 whites. The conference then adopted a name for the new organization, the League of Struggle for Negro Rights, LSNR. Upon arrival, I had submitted my draft of the manifesto for the League to the resolution committee where it was discussed and approved. The manifesto, a popularization of the party program for full black liberation, was now dramatically proclaimed by Mary Dalton amid the continuous applause of the delegates. Imagine the scene. A young white woman stands in front of a crowd of 100+ people and says, the black man and woman deserve their own country in America. Think about it. That's radical. Once again, I'm not sold on black nationalism, but I understand the excitement surrounding it because that is liberatory. This young white woman, Mary Dalton, stood in front of a crowd of 100 and so people, black and white, and said the black man and black woman in America deserve their own country. That's how radical the Communist Party is and was back in the day. I find that inspiring. That's inspiring. That goes to show what enlightenment can do, what party organizing can do, what unionization can do, and what understanding intersections can do. Because that's powerful. In the 1930s America, young white woman says the black man deserves his own nation in America. Dope. Anyway, I'm going to continue. It declared that U.S. blacks were an oppressed nation struggling against U.S. imperialism and called for unity of black and white workers in the fight against the common oppressor. It called for complete political equality and end to oppression and lynching to be obtained through self-determination of the black nation in the South. The confiscation of the land in favor of black and white soil tillers, of black and white soil tillers and state unity of the black majority area. This could be achieved fully only through socialism. The immediate program demanded abolition of all forms of discrimination, disenfranchisement, anti-marriage laws, and Jim Crow. It urged the establishment of a united trade union movement to include black workers on the basis of complete equality as an essential step in cementing real fraternal solidarity between black and white workers on the basis of common interests. It called for mass violation of all Jim Crow laws and death to all lynchers. Yes, death to all lynchers, death to all white supremacists and racist-ass police. Kill them all. Kill them all. Kill them all. Kill all white supremacists and lynchers and racist-ass cops. Kill them all. I agree. Not on board with it, yet favorable cause. Come on, we're thinking the same. We're thinking the same. I understand the excitement of black nationalism. I understand how nationalism can be a romantic cause du jour, if that's French. But I just can't get with it. Once again, I don't think it's popular with most black folks. But then again, Zionism was not popular with most Jews until they actually got the state. I don't know, just something to think about. So anyway, it called for mass violation of all Jim Crow laws and death to all lynchers, the banning of the KKK and all extra-legal terrorist organizations, the liquidation of debts and mortgages of the poor farmers. It urged members to organize LSNR chapters in communities throughout the country and to build the Liberator as the official organ for the new organization. Mary's speech was met with rousing cheers and a standing ovation. A national council was elected, of which I was a member. Ben Amis was chosen national secretary. The Communist Party, through Earl Browder, pledged support in mobilizing white masses for the black liberation struggle. In the movie of Harry Haywood's life, I want to play Harry, and I want my wife Act Dennis to play Mary Dalton. Because that's such a cool scene. That's such a cool scene. Young white woman stands in front of the crowd and says, "Black liberation and death to all lynchers." And everybody stands up and claps for acting. Yes, that's what we want to do. Anyway, I'm sorry. So Mary's speech was met with rousing cheer and a standing ovation. A national council was elected, of which I was a member. Ben Amis was chosen national secretary. The Communist Party, through Earl Browder, pledged support in mobilizing white masses for the black liberation struggle. The meeting adjourned late on the night of November 19th. We stood around the hall talking until about 2 in the morning. Ben Amis, Otto, and myself left the hall with the Jewish couple who had put us up during the conference. They lived in a middle-class white neighborhood and had driven us to and from the conference. Driving home, the conference successfully completed. We were all on top of the world. The conference had been especially stimulating for me, as it was the first I had attended since my return home. We pulled up in an alley behind their home to put the car in their garage. Otto, Ben, and I walked the short distance to the street and waited while they locked up. As we stood talking, a squad car cruised by. Its occupants, 4 white plainclothesmen, were immediately suspicious of 3 black guys coming out of an alley in white St. Louis in the middle of the night. St. Louis is a very historically racist and segregated city. Even though it's in the Midwest, it's still culturally the South. And if I remember right, Missouri Missouri was a slave state. Missouri was a slave state. I think it was either half free or half slave, something like that. And I believe Missouri fought on the side of the Confederacy. Once again, I am learning and educating myself with y'all. Look that up yourself and verify. But continuing here. The squad car stopped and the four of them got out. One of them hailed us. "What are you N-words doing here?" "We're waiting for our friends. We're delegates from a convention. Our friends are putting away their car. We're staying with them," Ben replied. We were under a big street light and I could see the cops' faces as they stared hostilely at us. Fortunately, at that moment, our friends came up. They sized up the situation immediately and intervened for us. They explained we were their friends. They even showed the convention badges we all had. "We just live around the corner. They're staying with us," they said. I don't want anybody to tell me the Jews aren't white. Don't ever tell me there aren't white Jews. There's some crazy people out there who supposedly believe Jews aren't whites. Then tell me how two Jewish people were able to speak up for three black men in 1930s America and say, "No, officer, please don't lynch them or kill them or beat them up. They're with us." Anyway, the cop in charge seemed satisfied with the explanation and turned to his friend saying, "Okay, let's go." A little mean-eyed cop standing next to Otto seemed disappointed at this turn of events, that he would be deprived of the pleasure of shooting or beating up N-words. I figured them as one of those kind that carved notches on their gun for the blacks he had killed. Looking at Otto, he said, "This N-word here seems like a bad N-word to me. You're a bad N-word, ain't you? Just little old man, just the littlest dick energy you could ever imagine." I was standing right next to Otto, and knowing his temper, I kept pulling on his sleeve. Otto murmured something like, "Oh, not so bad." "Yes, you are. You're a bad N-word," the cop responded, trying to bait him. But the head cop urged his partners to leave. Reluctantly, they all turned away and got back in their car. By the way, I don't like saying N-word. YouTube demonetizes me every time I say the actual word, so that's why I'm saying it that way. I would much rather read it out loud. All right, Kamal says, absolutely, Red Fox put St. Louis racism on the map, and like Bleeding Kansas, it was a disputed slave state. I just remember vaguely something about the Missouri Compromise. I believe the Missouri Compromise was Missouri would be allowed as a slave state, but then the next state had to be a free state. And so the compromise was that every new state that's added to the Union, because at the time there were only about 20 or so states, if I remember right, every new state, one had to be a slave one had to be free. And this was supposed to be a way to stop slavery from expanding, right? But let's continue here. All right, yes, you're a bad N-word, the cop responded, trying to bait him. But the head cop urged his partner to leave. Reluctantly, they all turned away and got back in their car. The incident had a sobering effect, cutting through the euphoria of the evening and bringing us back to solid ground. It would have been ironic for us to be the first victims of the police brutality against we had invade at the Congress. I returned to New York via Chicago, revisiting my aunts and sister. My father, now living with a niece in Elgin, Illinois, came into the city to meet me. Age had caught up with him, and his hair had grayed. He was still working as a janitor. I was glad to see him, but I felt sad too. We had so little in common. Let's remember, Harry Haywood is only one generation removed from slavery. In fact, his father was born a slave. He was only a slave until about, maybe 2 or 3 years old or something like that. But think how radically different that is. His father was born into slavery and had to just toil away all his life, trying to make ends meet for his family. Meanwhile, Harry Haywood was able to travel the world, study in the Soviet Union, become a leader in the party that he's a part of, and he comes back to his father, who's now old and sort of, getting up there in age, slowly withering away, and still working a menial job. This shit is real. That shit is real, bruh. Anyway, Kamal says, right, the compromise was a turning wall. Shout out to Kamal, always dropping knowledge in the chat. Kamal, if you could, please, comrade, drop some information about the Missouri Compromise. Just some real quick, like maybe some AI, chat GPT real quick. Tell us, what was the Missouri Compromise? Was Missouri a slave state? Was it? Did it fight for the Union? Did it fight for the Union, or did it fight for the Confederacy, et cetera, et cetera? Just a little bit of information, if you don't mind, or if anybody else could drop that information in the chat so that we could all be educated together, right? Continuing here. All he saw for Otto and me was trouble. He was still a Booker T. Washington man, and he didn't think the issue of freedom could be forced. To fight would only cause us grief. Once again, a difference in mentality. The Booker T. Washington ideology is that we need to lift ourselves by our bootstraps, get educated, work hard, don't rattle the system by demanding equality and rights. If we become respectable people, then we will have our rights given to us by benevolent white folks, is essentially the Booker T. Washington ideology. But continuing here. So, Harlem and Jokinen, white chauvinism on trial. Back in New York, I was temporarily assigned to the national office of the TUUL and put on its payroll. The position, as I remember, was a nominal one, and most of my work was with the Negro department of the party's New York district, of which I was soon to become head. My salary was $25 a week, which in those days was quite adequate. Quite adequate. The $25 was theoretical, however, for often there was not enough money on the till to pay the national office staff. In such cases, we would divide up what there was, or if there was nothing, go without. There was no such thing as payment of back wages. If you missed one payday, that was it. It was all fair enough. So these people are really dedicating their lives to the struggle. These are full-time revolutionaries, professional communists, professional revolutionaries. And with that comes sacrifice. You're not always going to have money in your pocket. You're not always going to be able to, splurge and spend. Sometimes you have to go without and tighten the belt. That's real. So, no party functionary went hungry in New York. One could run up a bill at a restaurant on Union Square where the management was friendly to the party. That's crazy that a restaurant is friendly to members of the Communist Party and gives them free meals. We were also invited to eat with different comrades. Several of us functionaries stayed for a while in the town apartment of a comrade who lived in Croton-on-Hudson. We were never bothered by the problem of rent. My associates in the district included black comrades like Steve Kingston and Tom Truesdale, as well as Peters, a Hungarian who was organizational secretary, and Albert Moreau, who was in charge of agitprop. Jack Stachel was then in charge of the National TUL office. Foster, the chairman, was still in jail for his part in the unemployment demonstration on March 6, 1930, as was Israel Amter, the district organizer of New York. Jack Johnstone and Alfred Wagenknecht, TUUL board members, were always on hand in the office. Anyway, Kamal says, thank you, Kamal, for dropping that information. The Missouri Compromise temporarily erased tensions surrounding the expansion of slavery into new territories, but it did not resolve the fundamental issue of slavery's existence. So, New York was a strange city to me. Before my recent arrival from Moscow, I had been in the city only once. That was upon my return from France after the First World War. New York's black community, Harlem, was different from what I had known on Chicago's South Side. Blacks in New York worked largely in service jobs as domestics and janitors, hotel, hospital, and laundry workers, as well as railroad porters and dining car waiters. Some worked in light industry like the needle trades, but there were few blacks in basic industry, as in Chicago. Harlem's ethnic composition included a large segment of West Indian migrants, or immigrants. I found them to be the most militant section of the black population. Racism, American style, was a sharp contrast to the more subtle racism of the West Indies, and the new immigrants reacted strongly. They drew on the West Indies' long tradition of anti-imperialist struggle, and it was no accident that they comprised a large proportion of our first revolutionary cadres. So, Kamal says, it admitted Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state. Thank you. Thank you, Kamal. That explains the Missouri Compromise. So Missouri and Maine were let in at the same time. Maine was free. Missouri was slave state. Thank you, Kamal. Appreciate that. Anyway, continuing here. Very interesting that he brings up that the black immigrants were very revolutionary and not reactionary as we like to think. You know, the current movement and climate right now is that foundational black Americans have always been the most revolutionary and ready to fight against white imperialism and white supremacy and white racial capitalism. But as he mentioned here, and as we also see through history, many of our fiercest fighters for liberation were black immigrants to America. Continuing here. The world's largest black community, Harlem, was recognized as the cultural capital of America. Okay, that's a little bit of a little bit of American chauvinism. The world's largest black community, where, like Lagos doesn't exist, like Addis Ababa doesn't exist. You know what I'm saying? That's crazy. But that's a little bit of American chauvinism. Americans just can't help but say we're the largest and biggest in everything. You get what I'm saying? Anyway, it was the home of the Black Renaissance. Harlem was the stronghold of black reformism and bourgeois nationalism. The NAACP and the Urban League had their national headquarters there. The Garvey movement was born there, and remnants still survived all around Harlem. I had always felt building a revolutionary movement, which meant building unity among blacks and forging alliances with white workers, was more difficult here in New York than in an industrial center such as Chicago. But the crisis of the Depression had been sort of a catalyst. Unemployed councils were built, uniting blacks and whites, even in New York. There were marches on City Hall and movements against evictions and police brutality. Branches of the LSNR were built in Harlem and Brooklyn. Harlem was soon to become a powerful center of the black liberation movement. Throughout the country, the communist movement was growing among blacks. Many hundreds were recruited directly into the Communist Party and thousands into mass organizations influenced by the party. Unemployed councils, trade unions, etc. This tremendous advance was accompanied, however, by a wave of racist manifestations and tendencies in the party and mass organizations. This clearly reflected the stepped-up racist offensive of the employers, aimed directly at halting the growing unity and maintaining the division between blacks and whites. The mass entrance of blacks into the revolutionary movement fleshed out hitherto hidden areas of white chauvinism. For example, there was a situation in the needle trades where over 8,000 blacks now worked. Some officials of that union, among them party members, failed to support the special demands of the growing number of blacks coming into the industry. In some shops, black workers paid for equal work. Maud White, recently returned from 3 years' study in the Soviet Union, was assigned head of the Needles Trade Union Department. She was shocked by this flagrant violation of TUUL principles, and even more so by the complacency of union leaders, among whom were a number of comrades. But white supremacist attitudes in their crudest form had cropped up in a number of the language clubs and cooperatives. These often resulted in outright discrimination against blacks. The language clubs, ethnic organizations of nationalities in the U.S., have formerly been part of the language federations affiliated to the party. Since the late 20s, as part of the Bolshevization campaign, the party had shifted to organizations based on the workplace and street branches and had cut out the language branches entirely. Party fractions within the language clubs and cooperatives remained, however. There was an incident at the Lithuanian Cooperative restaurant in Chicago where comrades had refused to serve black delegates to an unemployed conference meeting in the hall above. This was done on the plea that it would hurt business if blacks were served. The restaurant workers suggested other places to eat and gave the black delegates money for food. There was also a scandal in Gary where the Russian cooperative restaurant refused to hire black workers. Once again, white supremacy rampant everywhere, on the left and the right. Now, that doesn't make it equivalent. I'm not saying both sides are bad, but I'm just saying that we have to root out this on our side because it's definitely present on the other side. And this is reactionary thinking. All right. But most recent was the incident in New York at the Finnish Hall in Harlem itself. The Finnish Hall had been established in an area originally settled by Finns in East Harlem around 5th Avenue and 126th Street. Now this neighborhood was becoming predominantly black, and the hall was being engulfed by the black community. The hall had a pool room and gymnasium and sponsored many cultural, sports, and educational activities. One of its major attractions was the famous Finnish baths. Several black workers attended a dance at the Finnish Workers' Hall. Instead of receiving the welcome they expected, they were pushed into a corner and barely escaped being ejected. The caretaker, August Jokinen, was a communist. When faced with the question of why he had not come to the aid of the black comrades, Jokinen said he agreed with those who wanted to expel the blacks. Crazy. Nelson Moreno says, hey, Simon, racism is like crack for white people. They can't get enough. They can't get enough. And also, it's rooted in their obsession with BBC as well. This is crazy, though. Once again, a white communist from Finland, I assume, is saying that, yeah, we need to be racist against blacks in this bathhouse. That's crazy. Apart from these flagrant manifestations of white supremacy, the white chauvinist resistance to work among blacks took a more subtle and dangerous form. It was reflected in a tendency to regard the LSNR branches as a substitute for the party in the field of Afro-American work. The practice was widespread on the part of local party organizations to refer all issues concerning blacks to the LSNR, to regard it as a sort of clearinghouse for this work, thereby absolving the party from responsibility in this field. All right. Kareth J says, man, I want to give you some props for your determination and sustained effort in doing this and sharing with everyone. I want to say thank you, Kareth. Thank you to everybody out here. This book is slowly going out of print. This book is getting very hard to find. Of course, the internet is now giving this book new life. You can download the PDF easily, but this is not guaranteed. This is not guaranteed. Let's remember, everybody, we're living under fascist authoritarianism on the rise. In America, they're trying to ban the teaching of, milquetoast black history. They're trying to ban the teaching of even the basic stuff, like Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech is now woke. They don't want our children even learning about Rosa Parks, the stuff we took for granted. So I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if in a few years, these very radical books are taken off the internet itself. That's not me being hyperbolic or conspiratorial. I think it's very possible that we're living under a time where even the right to freedom of expression and to read what you want might be under attack. You get what I'm saying? So this is why we're doing this work, and I want to give a shout out to Kareth J. And this book is getting very hard to find. Remember, the paperback version of this book used to be available on Amazon. Somebody bought it. Somebody bought it. I don't know if somebody bought it or if the CIA said take that shit down. I don't know. But it wouldn't make sense if they said take it down because they left the hardcover up. But hey, even the CIA maybe got doged. Maybe even the CIA doesn't have money to buy hardcover $700 books on Amazon. Anyway, shout out to Kareth J for showing support. Let's continue here. So the list of white racist manifestations was long and growing in the Communist Party. Clearly a crisis in the party's mass work was building up. Further advance required a renewed drive, a counteroffensive on the question. The party's very existence as an effective revolutionary force was at stake. The party's Negro Commission, compromising the leading comrades in the work, was first to feel the pressure. Harlem was up in arms. Complaints poured in from the districts. It was clear that something had to be done. As a member of the National Negro Commission, I felt much of this firsthand, as did the other members of the commission. Our chairman was B.D. Amos, an articulate and aggressive man with considerable organizational ability. But he was relatively new in the party and perhaps a bit unsure of himself in dealing with older, veteran revolutionaries. He raised the question for the Politburo to intervene directly and push the districts to take a more aggressive stand against white supremacy or white chauvinism, I assume. Now, we're going to continue here. Here's Harry Haywood, looking very dapper. I can't pull off a turtleneck. Harry Haywood speaking at his 78th birthday celebration, Chicago, 1976. He aged so well. I want to look like this. I lost my hair already. But I want to keep my face, my skin, you know what I'm saying? He aged 76 years old, 78 years old. Black don't crack. What a beautiful black man. What a beautiful man. All right? Kamal says, taken for granted. Absolutely, man. We're taking this knowledge and this information for granted because I wouldn't be surprised if these books got pulled offline and if these books got pulled off of even Amazon. All right? Can I ask if your disdain for the bureaucratic and quotidian passages is a result of our capitalist conditioning to exalt the personal over social? No, Kareth. My thing is like, I'm just not that fascinated by inner party politics. Like even when I'm watching the liberal or bourgeoisie media, and I want to give an apology to anybody who's been listening to this book and then heard me complain about those passages where the communists and the socialists in the Soviet Union were like bickering amongst themselves over who's going to be the leader and stuff like that. It doesn't have anything to do with, I believe, the liberal conditioning that we live under, right? Though I didn't consider that. That's a very good point. It's just because I'm not that very fascinated by that sort of stuff, right? Even if like we hear about the Democrats and their infighting about not endorsing Zoran Memdani for like New York City mayor. That doesn't really fascinate me. I'm rooting for Zoran to win. Not that I think Zoran actually is going to usher in, the socialist and proletarian revolution. That's not why. I'm just rooting for him to win because I think we need to break this mentality in America where socialism is a scary word. And I think, if we have high-level, prominent people in America who identify as socialists or democratic socialists, then that will do a lot towards moving people out of this paradigm where they're thinking capitalism good, socialism bad, right? But very good point, Kareth. The bureaucratic parts just got a bit much for me. It was just a bit too much, and that just doesn't grab me. I'm very fascinated in Harry Haywood's thought, his thinking, and his life more than I am in, the Love Stone versus the Browder group. You get what I'm saying? But I'm going to continue here. I didn't realize that we read so far that we're in the middle of the book where they have all the pictures. So Harry Haywood's mother, Mrs. Harriet Thorpe Hall, above left, and 4 of her sisters. Wow. So she's the above left. So I assume it's this woman. This is Harry Haywood's mother, a surviving picture. Beautiful woman, beautiful family, just royal, just regal. What a beautiful, beautiful black family. I find it funny, though, that back in the day our ancestors didn't smile. You know what I mean? Because I grew up with a picture just like this at my grandmother's house. She had a picture of like her big-ass family. Like my dad's mom had like, I don't know, maybe like 7 or 8 brothers and sisters in total, right? And yeah, there's like this old black and white picture of them standing in front of like this house that barely looks like a shack, right? Because my people were like sharecroppers in like Alabama for like a few generations before we got educated and stuff like that and moved into, teaching and academia and stuff like that. But yeah, it's a very similar picture to this. And I also remember a picture of my aunts and my uncles, right? My dad's brother and sister. Yeah. And they had a very similar picture. It wasn't black and white. I think it was in color. But yeah, they weren't smiling either. So shit like that. Anyway, the Hellfighters of the all-black 369th Infantry 93rd Division in World War I. Sick picture, man. Absolutely sick picture. I love this picture, man. Everybody look at it. Hella serious, hella dapper, hella smooth. All right? Nelson Moreno says, I'm creating an anti-white dog collar. Okay, Nelson's out of control. Nelson is out of control. But I hope the collar shocks them every time a white man thinks about a big black penis. Because then they'll be getting shocked all day. Just randomly. 36 times a day at least. So 64 members of the Black 24th Infantry court-martialed in 1917 by an all-white tribunal on charges of mutiny and murder. If you haven't seen it, go check out the film, The 24th. Go check out The 24th, and then after that, come back to this channel and listen to the review Acty and I did of that film. Continuing here. Victory in Angelo Herndon case celebrated in New York. Herndon Center, Robert Minor and James Ford on Herndon's right. Okay, I don't think we got to that section yet of the text, but yeah. 8 of the 9 Scottsboro boys. I think we're going to be reading about that next. We haven't gotten to that chapter yet about the Scottsboro boys, but here they are right here. Here they are. Okay. Yes, let's take a look at this picture. Large communist-led demonstration in support of Scottsboro boys, December 9th, 1933, New York City. Beautiful to see all the people out there fighting for such a just cause. All right. Continuing. All right. We demand work for wages. Fight police brutality, say the signs right here in these pictures. Mass meetings of the International Labor Defense, which organized thousands of people in support of the Scottsboro boys, Sacco and Vanzetti, and other frame-up victims. I think one of the things the Communist Party is missing right now is getting in front of many of these legal cases for agitprop. We are missing the opportunity to advocate for what we advocate, which is, a livable wage, health care for everybody, an overthrow of the capitalist system, workers owning the means of production. We're missing that opportunity by not, by the Communist Party not sending a legal defense fund or sending lawyers to defend Luigi Mangione. Full exoneration of Luigi Mangione. And several other cases, right? I think if I could go back in time and do my life over again, I would have become a lawyer. Maybe I still can become a lawyer. I'm 34 years old. Maybe I still could. It would take some time. And I am in university right now. But I think I would go back in time and become a lawyer and work pro bono on very serious cases as a way to do agitprop on behalf of the Communist Party or some other socialist organization. I would be representing Luigi Mangione for free and arguing for his full exoneration, right? And then when I do interviews on CNN or MSNBC or, God forbid, Fox News, I'd be saying that Luigi Mangione was doing the Lord's work on behalf of the working class. And that CEO, I believe his name was Brian Thompson, was doing the devil's work by having AI kick people off of their health care in the quest to seek more profits, because these healthcare companies gain more money the more people that they deny healthcare coverage to. Now that's just wicked. He killed millions of people. Brian Thompson, I believe his name was, helped kill millions of Americans by default, by being a part of such a wicked organization. Luigi Mangione was just standing up for the American people. That's what I'd be arguing in court. And of course I would have a better argument if I actually went to law school. But I'm just saying, the Communist Party and all socialist organizations are missing out on opportunities that are popular with the people. People love Luigi Mangione out here. But the Communist Party and other socialist organizations are scared of being labeled violent or terroristic or something by not jumping out in front of these causes that are popular with the people. The Communist Party should be demanding the release of the Epstein file. We should be a part of all the social, cultural bullshit in the zeitgeist while still advocating for an overthrow of the capitalist system of production. You get what I'm saying? Because that's how we get people's attention. But I'm going to continue here. I would send all my... Nelson Moreno, I love my guy. I love him. I love Nelson Moreno. He said, if I could go back in time, I would send all my savings to Dr. Umar. That's hilarious. That's hilarious. You would send it to... You know, if you send that money to Dr. Umar, all that money's just going to go to Sukihana. All that money's going to go to all the single mothers he takes out on dates. All that money's just going to go to beard cream and brushes and Pan-African outfits. Boy, my guy, Hotep hustling for real. Anyway, let's continue here looking at the pictures. All right, left, New York City police attacking peacefully a rally of 8,000 jobless workers, February 15th, 1936. Look at the police doing their job. Racist, fascist pigs. Racist, fascist pigs. All police are racist, fascist pigs. Death to all lynchers and death to all white supremacists and racist police. Continuing here. Below, unemployed workers at Cleveland, Ohio receiving daily allotment of oranges. That's crazy. That's crazy. Look at that. Giving oranges to jobless people during the Great Depression. That was the time. That was when we were so close to overthrowing it. Maybe we're going to come back to it with this current administration doing everything it can to, undercuts the American worker. Maybe we're going to have another Great Depression and we'll have another opportunity to overthrow this system, but let's see. All right. Left, Harry Haywood with French journalist Leon Moussac during Spanish Civil War. We haven't gotten to the part of him being in the Spanish Civil War, which is going to be so ill. I can't wait to get to that part, man. I can't wait to get to that part. Anyway, below, 1967, reunion of veterans of Spanish Civil War in Mexico. From left, Haywood, David Siqueiros, Lewis Crane, and Judson Briggs, and Bill Miller. Sick, man. Sick. Former freedom fighters, former anti-fascist fighters who busted their guns. This is the thing, man. We got to get back to this. We got to get back to communists that bust their guns and not afraid to die for it. You feel me? I'm saying all this not to be, incendiary. I'm saying that that's what true radicalism is. It's not committing wanton acts of violence, but it's being willing to fight for the cause and not being scared of what the reaction will be from the reactionary fascist forces in America. You get what I'm saying? We shouldn't be afraid. Anyway, above, Paul Robeson surrounded by bodyguards while singing anti-fascist songs in Peekskill, New York, 1949. Shout out to Paul Robeson. Below, Paul Robeson at 60th birthday celebration in Chicago. Look at that. White men defending a black man from racist, fascist, pigs, as he continues to try to, raise the consciousness of the working class, man. Look at this. More pictures right here. Communist-led May Day demonstration above, 1935. Below, 1934. Opposite page, 1930. Large demonstrations. We need to get back to this. Mass mobilization. Mass mobilization of the people. We pledge not to support the government of the United States in any war it may conduct. This is another picture here from a banner of a protest right here. Amazing. All right, this is sideways, and I can't rotate the page without risking messing it all up, but this is more pictures of the protests, as you can see. William Z. Foster, former General Secretary and Chairman of the Communist Party. Shout out to William Z. Foster. We got to read some Foster sometime. National leadership of the CPUSA prior to 1957 National Convention. From left, James E. Jackson, right here on the left, holding a cigarette. Eugene Dennis, next to him. Max Weiss, next to him. Ben Davis, in rear, standing up. John Gates, Claude Lightfoot, Sid Stein, Carl Winter, and Fred Fine. This is another thing, too. The communists have to be dapper. We gotta be dapper. The fascists, to some degree, have an edge on style. I'm just being real. The fascists, because a lot of them have their roots in Italy, they have access to fine Italian wares. They are gonna. The communists have to be dapper. You get what I'm saying? Fly suits, skinny ties, tan jackets, wingtips, Oxfords. You get me? The communists got to be fly. We got to be dapper. We got to be dapper. We got to be fly. You know what I'm saying? Because the fascists have an aesthetic and look when they dress up. Now, when they're in normal street clothes, as you can see in an episode of Jubilee, they look no different than the average libtard or the average shit lib. But I'm just saying, us communists got to be dapper like this. Look at these guys. Styling, profiling, looking like a Ralph Lauren ad. I'm saying, I don't know anything about fashion. Don't listen to me. Anyway, massive civil rights march in Washington, D.C., September 28th, 1963. Following this event, mass rejection of peaceful democratic integration became apparent in the growing wave of ghetto rebellions. Okay. We're going to have Harry Haywood's take on the civil rights movement. We're going to have his take on this is the thing. He lived such a fascinating life, and he lived throughout most of the 20th century, so he got to see it all. He got to be a grown man and witness the Great Depression, the Civil Rights Movement, the falling apart of the Civil Rights Movement, and so many other things. The rise of the Soviet Union and revisionism within the Soviet Union. So many things. This is quite fascinating. Let's continue here. Historic meeting of black liberation leaders, W.E.B. Du Bois and Shirley Graham Du Bois, and Mao Zedong, chairman of the Communist Party of China, on October 1st, 1962. I had no idea I had no idea W.B. Du Bois met Mao Zedong. Mind blown. Mind blown. That's sick. I need to read. I heard W.B. Du Bois has 4 memoirs. And that's a communist that we should all be reading. We should all be reading our primary master teacher. W.B. Du Bois is our primary master teacher. And I repeat, I did not know this. I did not know W.B. Du Bois met Mao Zedong. Now this is my dream blunt rotation. Pass the Dutchie to the left-hand side. W.B. Du Bois to my left and Mao on the right. And we blowing big. We blowing big kush. We blowing big kush. Me and W.B. Du Bois. Anyway, continue here. Harry and wife Gwen with newborn son Haywood Jr. Look at this man. Look at his face. I love this picture. I love this picture and I love this face. That's such a beautiful picture. Aww. Look at that. I recently had Harry Haywood's son comment on one of my videos. Harry Haywood's son himself commented and he said, "Thank you for reading my father's book." I wonder if this is him. Haywood Jr. Here's a picture of Haywood Jr. I think that is him. The person in this picture, who is the baby, commented under one of my videos, and I think this is a picture of him. That's such poetic justice, such beauty. But what happened to Ina? Because who is Gwen? Who is Gwen? Who is Gwen? What happened to Ina? I'm sorry, but shout out to the Haywood family. Shout out to the Haywood family. Harry Haywood visits Al Murphy, former secretary of the Alabama Sharecroppers Union in 1977. So here they are right there, sitting dapper and cross-legged. Once again, communists, we have to be dapper. This is the word for 2025 going into 2026. Dapper communist. Dapumist. Dapumist. We must be dapper communists. We have to be swagged out. You get what I'm saying? Because it's all about aesthetics. That man happy as a motherfucker. Is he happy? I think he's like, oh shit. Shit got real. Because he's dedicated his life to revolutionary struggle and he's barely making, $25 a week at that. You get what I'm saying? And now he's got a baby. I think this is the face of, oh shit. Anyway, but shout out to Mad Villainy up in the chat. Let's continue here. More pictures. Okay, that's the end of the photo reel. That's the end of the photo reel. We're going to continue here. So he's talking about racist white folks within the Communist Party and what the party is going to do to try to fight that and stop that. By the way, we're going to be reading until page 362. So we got about 10 more pages to go. And just letting y'all know when we finish, we're going to read all of chapter 12 and then call it a day. But shout out to everybody who's showing love up in the chat. Let's continue. But Amos made no headway with the Politburo. Briggs, Maud White, and I then drew up a document listing the various incidents of white chauvinism. We demanded the Politburo take decisive action. We presented our document at a Politburo meeting in January. Present at the meeting were Earl Browder, B.D. Amos, Rose Wartis, Clarence Hathaway, then editor of the Daily Worker, and others. Briggs and I spoke first. Briggs was sore as hell, so angry that his usual stutter disappeared. Maud spoke last, dealing with the needle trade situation and resistance to the demands of the black workers. She became so emotionally upset, she burst into tears and asked to be relieved of her responsibilities in the needle trades unless she were given more support. An awkward silence settled over the room at Maud's outburst. After what seemed an interminable time, Browder broke the silence, though I can't recall what he said. Hathaway spoke up, calling for some dramatic action to help resolve the crisis. He proposed a public trial of those involved in the incident at the finish hall. His proposal was seized upon immediately as something concrete. A committee was set up to work with the district in organizing such a trial, including Hathaway, Amos, and myself as members. A renewed campaign throughout the party against white chauvinism and for unity of black and white workers got underway as a result of this meeting. A campaign of enlightenment resulted, which was tied to organizational and disciplinary measures against those guilty of racist acts. A number of expulsions took place. Resolutions were adopted in all districts summarizing the results of the campaign. For example, the February 19th, 1931 Daily Worker carried a resolution of the New York District Bureau, closed ranks against chauvinistic influences. A number of hard-hitting articles were also published in the party press, including that of the language groups. This was all tied to the mobilization for the Jokinen trial scheduled for March 1st. It was also made part of the National Day of Action of Unemployed on February 25th, when marches on state capitals were scheduled. Our committee for the trial held a meeting with the communist faction of the Finnish Club with Jokinen present. The members were self-critical and agreed that they acted wrongly in not throwing out the racist elements at the dance. But Jokinen not only justified his position, he even carried it further and argued that if blacks were allowed to enter the club and pool room, they would soon be coming into the bath. And he, for one, did not want to bathe with blacks. Okay, Jokinen's got to go. You can't be a racist communist. Okay. All right. All right. For your perusal, it's on my nightstand waiting to be read. I don't know what you mean by that, Kareth. I don't know what you mean by that. Explain more. Maybe there was a missing comment. I missed that. Anyway, you can't be a racist communist, Jokinen. He's over here defending... He's over here saying, yeah, we were right to kick out the black folks from our communist meeting in this Finnish bathhouse because he doesn't want to bathe with Negroes. You cannot be a racist communist. This is insane. That's crazy. The Jokinen trial took place on Sunday afternoon, March 1st, 1931, in the New Harlem Casino at 116th Street and Lenox Avenue, the very heart of Harlem. That morning, I attended a meeting of the steering committee responsible for the New York district for the conduct of the trial. Tight organization was required because the entire trial was to take place in less than 4 hours that afternoon. The trial had received wide publicity in both the bourgeois press and the black press. Our plans called for Wagenknecht, National TUUL organizer and unemployed leader, to be chairman and judge. Clarence Hathaway would try the case for the party. Attorney for the defense would be Richard B. Moore, head of the Negro department of the ILD. I arrived at the New Harlem Casino early. It was a large hall where dances were usually held, but it was already crowded. Over 2,000 people jammed the hall. Most went without seats. Hundreds of blacks, including women with babies in their arms, were among them. Party workers moved up and down the aisles, selling magazines and buttons. Banners around the room read, "Race inferiority is a white ruling class lie. Smash Jim Crow laws and practices." Alfred Wagenknecht, a white-haired veteran revolutionary, called the court to order. Selection of a jury of 14, 7 whites and 7 blacks was then begun. Nominations were made and I was one of the jurors elected. Hathaway, the prosecutor, stepped forward to present the case. This is what's called holding court in the street, and I love it. I love it. They're holding court for Jokinen. They say, listen, man, we gonna take care of this our own way. This is sick. I like this. Anyway, Hathaway, the prosecutor, stepped forward to present the case. He was a forceful speaker, emphasizing his points with his right hand, which had several fingers missing, a legacy from his old machinist trade. In a lengthy address, often interrupted by applause, he described Jokinen's crime, outlined the communist position on the Afro-American question, and demanded Jokinen's expulsion for the crime of white chauvinism. Comrade Jokinen, declared Hathaway, not only justified the hostility shown to the Negro workers who attended the dance, but he went even further. He claimed that if they were admitted to the club, they might go further and enter the pool room and even the bathhouse, and that he did not wish to bathe in the same tub used by Negroes. Comrade Jokinen made formal acceptance of the communist principles of equal rights, but he was not willing to accept its substance. The view Comrade Jokinen showed, Hathaway pointed out, is the same view persistently put forth among the workers by capitalists. Everywhere, in church, in the press, and in schools, you see this conscious effort to cultivate race prejudice. The capitalists know that if they can develop feeling against the Negro among the white workers, they can oppress and exploit the Negroes and weaken the unity of Negro and white workers, and also suppress the wages of white workers. The theories expressed by Comrade Jokinen play into the hands of the capitalist class and make him actually an agent of the bourgeoisie, Hathaway said. The Communist Party, he emphasized, is committed to abolishing all customs which prevent Negroes from enjoying full equality with whites in every way. Going to Kareth J., referring to a book entitled Arise Africa, Roar China, Black and Chinese Citizens of the World in the 20th Century. Dope title, probably a very dope book. And I think that's in relation to the picture of W.B. Du Bois with Comrade Mao. So, once again, picture the scene. Picture the scene. The communists are having their closed meeting where 7 white men and 7 black men are the jury for this white man who is accused of being a racist within the party, and a white man who is missing a few fingers because they were mangled in a machine after working, before there were, labor protections and all this sort of stuff, is accusing the white man of being a white supremacist chauvinist and that he needs to get kicked out of the party because he is advocating an idea that the capitalist class puts in our minds that somehow black people are less than white people and that racial division is necessary. Think about that. This is radical even today. You barely get white people calling out other white people for white supremacy and anti-blackness and stuff like that. You rarely get that now. I know you might look online and you might have an algorithm of a bunch of woke liberals who tell you that racism bad and stuff like that. Talk to the average white person. They think racism is okay. They think it's natural. The average white person is implicit in white supremacy and anti-blackness. They think that racial division is okay, that there is somehow a natural explanation to the differences and outcomes in lives of black people and white people and other non-white people on this planet. The average white folk, the average white person out there has been indoctrinated with this type of thinking. Anyway, continuing here. The Communist Party, he emphasized, is committed to abolishing all customs which prevent Negroes from enjoying full equality with whites in every way. The whole courtroom was attentive to Hathaway's presentation. Their attention now turned to Richard Moore, who spoke for the defense. The fine black orator admitted the guilt of his client and that he had committed a grievous crime. Very interesting. So the white man, the white communist, Jokinen, who was accused of being a racist, has a black lawyer defending him in front of the party. And the black guy says, yeah, my client is wrong, but I wonder what his defense is going to be. Moore further contended that Jokinen was not the only guilty person. He had realized the seriousness of his offense and now wanted to correct his errors in practice. It is the vicious bourgeois system, the damnable capitalist system, which preaches corruption and discrimination, which is the real crime, Moore shouted. Middle-class opportunism permeated the mind of Jokinen and caused him to object to Negroes used in the club for fear white people would stay away and the club would suffer economically. Moore continued, let us not yell for the blood of Jokinen, but examine ourselves and see how far we have contributed to this thing of which Jokinen was guilty. We must not make a Pascal lamb of Jokinen. We must win him back. Expulsion from the Communist Party is worse than death at the hands of the bourgeoisie. The audience broke into loud cheers when Moore, with his hands clasped over his head, shouted, I would rather my head be severed by the lynchers than to be expelled from the Communist International. We must not destroy Comrade Jokinen, pleaded Moore. We must save him for the communist movement. Moore's plea was greeted by prolonged applause. Powerful. So what he's trying to say is like, listen, we're going to make mistakes. And Jokinen made a mistake. He believed that his business is more important because he doesn't want to scare away his white patrons by dissuading his black patrons from coming and comrades from coming into his business. You get what I'm saying? So instead of kicking him out the party, let's re-educate him. Don't send him to the gulag. Don't exile him. Re-educate him is what he's trying to say, which is a which is a good point. Jokinen submitted a full confession, reading it in Finnish. He admitted to having been influenced by white chauvinism, the ideology of imperialism. I refute and condemn my previous attitude. I want to prove in action that I no more have the slightest white chauvinistic tendencies. I ask this workers' court not to deprive me of the opportunity to further carry on my activity for the Communist Party and for the working class. Our jury then retired to return half an hour later with the verdict. Thomas Mitchell, the black foreman, announced the verdict. Jokinen was guilty. He should be forthwith expelled from the party. Ooh. But might be readmitted after he had expiated his crime and proved his worthiness by the performance of a number of tasks. Okay, so somewhere in the middle. He's not forever expelled, but he's basically getting put on timeout. It's better than what I would have done. I would have killed him. I would have said we need to kill him. But to each their own. These were as follows. 1, to immediately go to the Finnish hall, call a mass meeting, and give a report of the trial, couched in such terms as to destroy white chauvinistic tendencies in the club. 2, to carry on in the club a persistent struggle for the admittance of black workers and the granting to them of full privileges, including use of pool room, bathhouse, and restaurant. 3, to join the LSNR and sell an adequate number of copies of The Liberator. 4, to lead a demonstration against a certain Harlem restaurant which barred blacks. And 5, to take a leading part in all the movements and activities aimed at doing away with discrimination of any sort against blacks. Fair enough. Fair enough. After it had all been explained to Jokinen in Finnish, he solemnly nodded his head and said, I will do it. I did wrong at the club. The trial ended with the audience singing the Internationale, clenched fists held high. As I watched the crowd swarm the hall, it dawned on me that I had witnessed and participated in a historic event in the battle for black rights. The impact of the trial was tremendous throughout the country. The most important newspapers carried full stories and photos of the proceedings. The trial represented a breakthrough in understanding the importance of the struggle of the Afro-American people. It was the first time the revolutionary movement clearly and openly declared war on the pillars of American imperialism. I think what's also good to note is that, the Communist Party at that time was getting a lot of press, right? Maybe good press, yellow press, bad press, whatever you want to call it. Meanwhile, both of the parties of the liberal establishment, the capitalist world, were explicitly anti-black. At the time, the Republicans were the party that most black people voted for at the turn of the 20th century, 1930s America, stuff like that. Many black people, supported the Republican Party because that was the left. But even they were explicitly anti-black at that time. So I wish this book pointed out how different the communists were, a party that was on the fringe but still got recognition in the United States press, and how explicitly anti-black both of the main political parties were in the United States, to give some juxtaposition, to give some contrast. But I'm going to continue here. As for Jokinen, he conscientiously carried out his pledge made to the workers' court. He became a familiar and popular figure on the streets of Harlem, in demonstrations of the unemployed, for the Scottsboro Boys, and against the Jim Crow policies of a local cafeteria. After 6 months, he was readmitted to the party as one of the staunchest fighters for our program. These activities of Jokinen, including his attitude at the trial, evoked the wrath of the racist government and its immigration department, and finally resulted in his deportation. So Jokinen got his ass kicked out of the United States because he became a reformed racist. America said, no, move to America, white Finnish man, and hate on black people. But when Jokinen said, I'm not going to hate on black people, and he got re-educated by the communists, America kicked him out. That's crazy. That's crazy. Which goes to show that it was an active strategy of the United States to do blanqueamiento, which is basically importing white people to help bolster the white supremacists that were in power here. You get what I'm saying? And they didn't want elements like this in the country. You're an anti-racist in America? Get out. That's crazy. Anyway, These activities of Jokinen, including his attitude at the trial, evoked the wrath of the racist government and its immigration department, and finally resulted in his deportation. Although in the country 13 years, Jokinen had never taken out U.S. citizenship and faced deportation proceedings on charges of belonging to the Communist Party. We were all surprised to hear that he was arrested by immigration inspectors the day after his trial. The International Labor Defense carried on a campaign on his behalf, which failed to prevent his deportation several months later. That's crazy. You could get kicked out of the country for your political beliefs. Oh, wait, we live in that sort of America now where that does happen. Who thought? This is what Black MAGA voted for? I love saying Black MAGA voted for it, even though the majority of MAGA voters are white. But this shit it's funny how things go full circle. Almost 100 years ago, people were getting kicked out of the country for their political affiliations. And now if you speak out against a genocide, you can get your ass sent to a Louisiana detention center or Alligator Alcatraz. Continuing here. The Jokinen trial was a significant turning point in the party's work and came as the culmination of a long period of ideological struggle over the line of the 6th Congress. I always felt that it had a cleansing effect on the party, heightened the consciousness of the cadre, and cleared the deck, so to speak, of the most blatantly chauvinistic practices within the party. The trial was a living political demonstration of our program on the Afro-American question and had tremendous repercussions on the Black Liberation Front as a whole. For the first time, the Communist Party was seen by the broad masses of blacks as a serious contender for the hegemony of the movement. Thus, the basis was laid for our revolutionary leadership in the great battles of the 30s. It was directly as a result of the campaign around the Jokinen trial that the party was able to take up the case of the Scottsboro Boys and build it into a great international movement. Hundreds of thousands of people were mobilized in a militant struggle against one of the cornerstones of capitalist oppression of blacks, the institution of lynching. I believe this will be the last section, the Scottsboro section. Yeah, we have only 5 or 6 more pages until chapter 13. So if you have any more comments or questions, let it be known. Speak your piece, because we're about to wrap this up with this last section, the Scottsboro Boys, and call it a day. I followed the Scottsboro issue closely from the beginning. On March 25, 1931, a freight train crowded with young people hoboing from Chattanooga to Memphis in search of work passed through Paint Rock, Alabama. 9 black youths were pulled off by the local sheriff and his deputies, charged with raping 2 white girls who happened to be riding the same freight train. So a bunch of young people, this was before cars were everywhere, and also when America was very industrialized and we had trains crisscrossing the nation. So a bunch of young people were doing young people shit, and they hopped on a train to get from Chattanooga, Tennessee to Memphis looking for work. And as they were passing through Alabama, police pulled these 9 black boys off and accused them of raping 2 white women who were also on the train. The 9 boys were Charles Weems, age 20, Clarence Norris, 19, Haywood Patterson, 17, Ozzie Powell, 14, Eugene Williams, 13, Olin Montgomery, 17, Andy Wright, 18, Willie Robertson, 15, and Roy Wright, 13. The situation was made to order for the local henchmen of Alabama's ruling oligarchy. The economic crisis had struck deeply into the entire region of northern Alabama, an area of mainly small family-sized farms and a few textile mills. Many in its largely white population were facing evictions and repossessions of tools and livestock by the banks. In the textile mills, layoffs were throwing many out of work, but the sizable black population in the area suffered even greater hardships. Moving with lightning speed, the local authorities of Paint Rock lost no time in exploiting the case. The boys were taken to Scottsboro, the county seat, where they were arraigned, indicted, tried, and found guilty of rape in a period of less than 3 weeks. The trial began on April 6th and ended on the 10th, with the sentence of 8 boys to death in the electric chair. The case of the 9th boy, Roy Wright, was declared a mistrial. The prosecution had requested life imprisonment in view of his youth. He was 13, but the jury returned deadlocked with 7 jurors insisting on the death penalty. The trial was carried through in a lynch atmosphere. On the day it opened, mobs of white natives from the surrounding countryside and towns surged around the courthouse. A band was playing "There'll Be a Hot Time in the Old Town Tonight." The National Guard had been called out, ostensibly to preserve order and prevent the mob from attacking the boys. One of the youths, however, was bayoneted by a guardsman. Sick, America. Sick America. It was the new style, legal lynching carried through with the cooperation of the courts and law enforcement agencies. It was intended to guarantee to the mob the same results as would be obtained in an old-fashioned burning and hanging in a public square, the death of the victims. The courtroom farce at Scottsboro was a part of a wave of racist terror sweeping the South, which had resulted in 10 known lynchings in the past 3 months. Clearly, its purpose was to keep the N-words in his place, to prevent unity of blacks and poor whites, in other words, to divert the unrest of black and white workers into channels of interracial strife. The aim received upon and brutal expression by the governor of Texas, Ross Sterling, an arrogant spokesman of the racist rulers of the South. Speaking of a case in his state, he stated, it may be that this boy is innocent, but it is sometimes necessary to burn down a house in order to save a village. That was the logic back then. They said, yeah, this black boy might be innocent, but we might have to kill him just to keep the peace. The capitalists are just playing in our face. They say it blatantly. Yeah, sometimes we have to kill people of the working class to actually keep the peace, to satiate their bloodlust so that they don't eat us. The Chattanooga Negro Ministers Alliance retained Stephen R. Roddy, reportedly a member of the Ku Klux Klan, as defense attorney. They got a KKK member to play defense for these boys who were charged with rape. Amazing. His defense amounted to little more than pleading for life imprisonment instead of the death penalty. The NAACP kept a low profile on the case as they were not sure the boys were innocent, and they wanted to avoid the possibility of the association being identified with mass rapists. This was their official justification from holding back from the case. The NAACP is not an organization to defend black criminals. We are not in the field to condone rape, murder, and theft because it is done by black men. When we hear that 8 colored men have raped 2 white girls in Alabama, we are not first in the field to defend them. If they are guilty and have a fair trial, the case is none of our business. Is it possible to have a fair trial in the Deep South? Come on now, crazy. It was only when confronted with the dispatch of the ILD and the communists in taking up the case, and with the widespread outcry against illegal lynching in all sections of the black population, that the NAACP belatedly tried to enter the case and force the communists out. We communists viewed the case in much broader class terms. First, we assumed the boys were innocent, victims of a typical racist frame-up. Second, it was a lyncher's court. No one, innocent or guilty, could have a fair trial in such a situation. From the beginning, we called for mass protests against the social crime being acted out by Wall Street's bourbon henchmen in the South. On April 2nd, the Daily Worker called for protests to free the boys. Again, on April 4th, the Southern Worker carried an article that characterized the case as a crude frame-up. I remember distinctly how I became involved in the case. I was sitting in the party district office on 12th Street. I had been reading the newspapers, which were filled with stories of the trial in Scottsboro. It seemed things were going badly there. The first group of boys had already been sentenced to death in the electric chair. See, the Scottsboro case is the trial of the century. I know a lot of people like to point to OJ. They say OJ was the trial of the century. This is really the trial of the century because this seems like it was a part of like mass media hysteria and also a big wake-up call to black America to get on our shit and fight back against this stuff because this is insane. And it's insane that we still have the death penalty now in America. It's a shame that America still has the death penalty. There should be no death penalty in America except for white supremacists. Anyway, I'm going to continue here. The first group of boys had already been sentenced to death in the electric chair. I was trying to figure out what our next step should be. It was clear that if we did not take over the defense of at least some of the boys, they were doomed. Suddenly, Sol Harper burst in on me. If there was one person who, before anyone else, understood the significance of the Scottsboro case and what the role of the party should be, it was Sol. Sol Harper was a tall, rangy, stoop-shouldered black comrade, about 35 at the time, with prematurely graying hair. He combined the qualities of a dedicated communist with the skills of an expert investigative reporter. He seemed to have an inexhaustible store of information about current issues and knew everything that was happening or was about to happen on the black rights front. He always carried a briefcase stuffed with clippings from current newspapers and magazines. When I first arrived in New York, it was Sol who guided me through Harlem, explaining what was happening on the streets and introducing me to countless people. One always felt that Sol had his finger on the pulse of the people. He knew what they were thinking and how they would respond to any event. I had never seen him so agitated as he was that morning. What's the party going to do? He demanded. The NAACP was selling these boys out. They were going to the chair, and the black community was up in arms. We have to step in now, Sol declared. We must take over the legal defense, send our lawyers down, and get them to line up the boys and their parents. Sol got through to me that it was time for a decision. As soon as he left, I went up to the national office on the 9th floor of the building to talk with Amos and enlisted his support. Together, we went to see Bob Miner in the next office. Bob had just been released from prison after serving 1 year for his leadership in the March 6th Union Square demonstration against unemployment and for relief. Bob was keenly sensitive on the Afro-American question and saw the great mass of Negro people as one of the greatest and most effective forces for the revolutionary overturn in the United States. He had just finished reading the accounts of the trial and had arrived at the same conclusion we had. The party had to move in on the legal defense. The three of us went to speak with Browder. He too had been reading about the trial and had just received a first-hand report from Scottsboro where the legal lynching was taking place. Browder agreed that we must act quickly. We immediately called a meeting with the ILD and the decision to enter the case was made. The ILD moved with dispatch. Joseph Brodsky, chief lawyer for the organization, and his associate, Irving Schwab, went immediately to Birmingham and Chattanooga, where they got the consent of the parents and boys to enter the defense. Alan Taub, another ILD attorney who was already in Chattanooga, engaged the services of a local lawyer, George W. Chamley. Kamal says, unemployment relief. That's what we need. We need more of that. We need more of that. The ILD had now gained control of the case. On April 10th, 1933, the day of the sentencing, the Central Committee issued a statement in the Daily Worker exposing the case as a courthouse lynching being carried out by the Southern white ruling class. It called upon all working class and Negro organizations to adopt strong resolutions of protest and to wire these to the governor of Alabama. But wires to such Capitol officials alone, it went on to say, will do no good. We must organize such at greatest possible speed, mass meetings and militant mass demonstrations against this crime. The statement concluded with the call to build a united front of all working people and farming masses of this country, and put forward the slogan, death penalty for lynchers, and stop the legal lynching at Scottsboro. That's radical. Once again, we need radical messaging. Death to all lynchers. Death to all white supremacists. Death to all racists. Facts. Anyway, on May 23rd, Bob Miner, Amos, and I left New York to attend the All-Southern Scottsboro Defense Conference, which was to meet on May 24th in Chattanooga. Miner represented the Communist Party, Amos spoke as secretary of the LSNR, and I represented the TUUL. Upon arrival in Chattanooga, we met with local comrades and Tom Johnson, the party's Southern organizer. The four of us formed a steering committee for the conference and set up a command post in the home of a local black comrade. Tom gave us a rundown on preparations and expectations for the conference. The atmosphere was tense. Local newspapers had sought to whip up hostility against the meeting, screaming with protests against the new carpetbag invasion from the north. The chief of police assured the white community that his forces were alerted and would take action against any attempt to disrupt the racist status quo. Tom was not even sure that the conference would be allowed to meet. We learned that police harassment had prevented the arrival of the Alabama delegation. Most of them had been picked up by Birmingham police as they were getting into assembled cars to drive to the conference. Since it was early morning, before sunrise, they were charged with a violation of the Birmingham curfew laws. They were later released without fines, but too late to attend the conference. I was disappointed, for I had expected my brother Otto will be part of the Alabama delegation. Our fear that the police might try to disrupt the conference by arresting its leaders was well grounded. We adopted security measures to prevent this. All of us on the steering committee took turns going to the conference hall, one person at a time. When one returned, another would go. We adhered to this plan throughout the conference so that the whole steering committee was never present in the hall at any time. It was at this conference that I met Angelo Herndon for the first time. Herndon was to become the first victim of a frame-up in Atlanta just a year later. I remember the enthusiasm and militancy of the 200 delegates, especially of the local people. Other delegates told me that when Amos spoke, he brought people to their feet as he called on blacks everywhere to fight for the lives of the 9 Scottsboro boys. In this spirit, he invoked the memory of Nat Turner, Frederick Douglass, and other heroes in the days of slavery. Bob Miner, as I understood, also gave an impressive speech. I too spoke, delivering greetings and support from the TUUL. The conference ended without incident. We were all enthusiastic. It was the first conference against lynching to be held in the South. Bob, Ben, Tom, and I were exhilarated and dropped our security precautions prematurely. We walked down to the conference hall and stood talking on the sidewalk, less than a block away from the conference. As we stood watching the delegates leave, we congratulated each other on the success of the conference. A patrol wagon swooped down upon us, and the 4 of us were arrested and charged with blocking the sidewalk. We spent the night in jail, and next morning, Chamley, our Scottsboro attorney, got us out with a $10 fine each. And that's that. We're going to be wrapping it up here. That was the end of chapter 12. Really enjoyed that chapter. So glad that, now the setting has changed. I really enjoyed the Moscow chapters, but this is a lot more action-packed because America is where the fight is. America is where the biggest battles are. And, that was a very captivating chapter. Looking forward to reading chapter 13. I'm going to try to come live tomorrow. I promise people we're going to be finishing this book regardless. Whether I take a week off, a month off, we're going to be finishing this book because I've been waiting to read this book for a long time in my life. For the past 15 years or so, I've been waiting to read this book, and I'm glad I'm finally getting to it. But I want to give a shout out to everybody who showed love and jumped into the chat. Shout out to Kamal. Shout out to Kareth J. Shout out to Mad Villainy. Shout out to Nelson Moreno. And shout out to anybody who was watching and stayed silent out there or who is enjoying this educational content. We're going to try to go live tomorrow. I will catch y'all then, and be easy out there.